we all know what the historic building stock of Ireland is, or generally we do, but an awful lot of the public perceive it to be just the grand houses, the cathedrals, the churches, and don't really realise that it is the more modest structures, it is the vernacular buildings that were mentioned earlier. And maybe, I suppose, the role of the conservation officer in the local authority has helped to diversify that understanding of what the building stock is. Just to respond to some of the questions that were raised, in the Fingal Development Plan, we actually put in specific objectives to deal with the historic building stock, the vernacular building stock, and there's mechanisms that you can use to do that as well. So it's having, as with the expertise to advise and to assist with the decision making that can help expand that understanding. So the Association of Conservation Officers, we are local authority employees. We are professionals that have training, expertise and understanding in the built heritage, and we're there to guide, advise, not just the staff in-house, but also the community and the owners of these buildings, whether they're protected structures or whether they're historic buildings that have no protected designation on them. We've been established, or the role of it was established back in 1999, and I suppose in the 10 years is one of the things that has occurred is there have been, or has been, the employment of conservation officers throughout the country. Now, not every local authority has it, and the map provided there gives you an idea of the dispersal of it. So there's 16 local authorities that have the specific role of conservation officer. Some of those have also supporting staff as assistant conservation officers or conservation research officers. They're mostly in the Dublin region. Most of us perform the role on our own and cover that whole jurisdiction. Some other local authorities may not have a conservation officer post per se, but they have assigned the duties to a professional within their organisation. So they're maybe called a conservation architect or a conservation planner within that organisation. So you have 21 local authorities in total that the Association of Architectural Conservation Officers represents and deals with. And then the remaining local authorities, I'm sure they are implementing the provisions there. Some of them would have the administrative element done in-house, and others, or they hire in external conservation consultants. So we're there, as I said, to share the knowledge. We're hoping to try and form consistent approaches across the board and to have that, and to give our experience and deal with it. So, I mean, the conservation officer would be the person that would recommend additions to the record of protected structures, would be designating the architectural conservation areas. They're a statutory designation. The village design statements, our strategies are very interesting because they're very much a ground-based approach, getting the local community to identify what's important to them, but there isn't a statutory designation to them. So the architectural conservation area is a mechanism that could be used with heritage-led regeneration because it has a statutory basis to it. So I'm kind of, hopefully, I've gone a little over the minute on that slide. I mean, we're all here thinking about the concept of what is going on, vacancy, neglect and dereliction. That's not because we're in a recession. That happened in the boom period, as has been discussed. That an awful lot of this has been inherited, and it's trying to look at ways and mechanisms of how to actually bring that forward and have a focus on what is sustainable development. That you often have the built heritage sector is seen as being separate, and that it is a specialism. I have a belief that when we're training professionals that work in construction, whether they are the trades or the professionals themselves, so joiners, architects, building control, engineers, they should be being trained in both new construction and in existing building stock. And I'm not quite sure that there's a full balance between that. I think there should be. That you have to have an understanding, and that will help with the decision-making processes, I think, in the future, and some of the projects that we'll see coming out, if there is that balance throughout the whole sector and an understanding of what we have, and it's not just really seen as a specialism. I'm kind of moved on to kind of bring us up and talk about heritage-led regeneration and the European Union, because an awful lot of the direction that we're following is about what the EU is funding and what its programmes relate to. And there's very much an integrated, collaborative and sustainable approach within the European Union to everything, and that includes the built environment. You have the Leipzig Charter that is directing an awful lot of the structural funding and structural programmes, and we should be thinking about that and making sure that our projects and programmes adhere adhere to that. So that is talking about the integrated, sustainable urban development. URBACT, when you start looking at the schemes that are being funded under that and the programs that they've set up, they're very, very interesting, and they're all tied into sustainability. And to me, architectural heritage and the reuse and repair of that totally meets the requirements and the principles that are behind this. So there's 56 projects in total. I'm not going to list them all. I've just picked out a few here. Some of them are completed and some of them are still in train. Like the first one, LC FACO, that is just a working group implementing the Leipzig Charter. The HERO project is something else that I would mention. It is complete, but HERO stands for Heritage as an Opportunity. And what it has done there is it's actually set out strategies for integrated cultural heritage management plans for historic towns. So the lead town of that was Regensburg in Germany, but you had Liverpool, Leuven, Valletta, and Grants as the partner towns in it. Another interesting programme under URBACT is URBACT Markets, and Dublin City Council have signed up to this. It's in operation and it's due for completion in 2015, and it's looking at how urban markets, the historic markets, can help with local regeneration and local development. And then the only other one I'll mention really is the last one at the bottom, USACT. If you Google URBACT, you'll get more details on this. But USACT, this is a programme to define ways to achieve opportunities for people and businesses to settle in existing locations without the consumption of further land. And so that has only just really launched in May 2012 and is due for completion in 2015. And again, Dublin City seems to be a partner, so very interested to see how that develops and what that brings to the fore. And then I think one of the things that maybe the conservation and heritage sector have been poor, I suppose, I'm not sure poor is the right word, but we haven't been to the forefront of using these funds or looking to see what is out there and where the monies are being directed, and maybe we should have been, and hopefully we'll learn our lessons now, because the next round of structural funds are being investigated at the moment and have been decided on, so an awful lot of these ones are coming to an end in 2013, are the allocations, and we should be ready for the next round and preparing ourselves for that. But just under Interreg, that is for the urban setting, that is a funding programme there for strengthening social and economic cohesion throughout Europe. And you had two projects that I'll talk about. I'm going to talk about Inherit in a little bit more detail in the next two slides. Inherit was a network of cities that had heritage-led regeneration schemes, and they wanted to share the good practice and the lessons that they had learned. That's completed. But the documentation is there for everybody to use as guidance. And one that I've just found out about is HISCAPE. So this is recently established. It's focusing on small historic towns and the preservation of rural historic assets. And what is very interesting is that they have decided on the partner cities, but they are looking and inviting historic towns who are interested in the project to join a special group of non-partner cities. So I think that maybe some of the local authorities out there, cities, kind of throughout Ireland, should think of joining that, and the websites are indicated there. But again, I suppose if you Google or search for HISCAPE, you'll find that information. LEADER has already been mentioned by Martin as helping funding in the architectural and archaeological heritage area, but only really recently have we realised the potential that is there, and we're into the last year of it, so there's a little bit of a scrabble going on to try and get all of these projects, and that's been our problem, I suppose. One says we haven't realised until we're at the very, very end, and you need to have time to work out properly what you have, get the information right and correct to make sure the project is appropriate and doesn't damage the environment. And another structural fund that I find very interesting is this thing, Jessica. It's the Joint European Support for Sustainable Investment in City Areas. And so it's supporting sustainable urban development and regeneration through financial engineering mechanisms. And I'm not quite sure what that means, but the details are on the website. And one of the key areas that it's supporting is heritage or cultural sites for tourism or other sustainable uses. I think it's an awful lot there for us to maybe look at and be ready for with the next round. The Inherit project, as I said, it was completed. It was actually under Interreg 3. But what it's done is gathered all together their experience in this document, Investing in Heritage, a guide to successful urban regeneration. So they wanted to provide evidence to convince city authorities and stakeholders of the benefit of heritage-led regeneration, set out the lessons that they have learned in their towns, and produce good practice guidance on that and how to achieve it. So the guidance is a thick enough document, it sets out the details, but the last kind of 4 or 5 pages set out the specific guidance, and there was 4 key headings. Think and act strategically, focus on the identity and diversity, and it's invest in regeneration and work in partnership. I'll just go back through the detail of it. So thinking and acting strategically, so this is the key concept. You have to know what you have. You have to value investing in heritage as a driver of urban regeneration and identity of the place. So this is all about understanding it. And I think sometimes some of the projects that have gone ahead haven't really understood what they have, and they've tried to insert new into it when what you're doing or what you should be doing is appreciating what is existing there and developing that. It again was looking kind of for the key leadership from the local authority. But the last 2 bullet points in that area, this is again where I think that the Conservation and Heritage lobby or group need to kind of look at it, that they were linking the benefits back to EU priorities. So we link it back to integrated and collaborative and sustainable development, and that you need to start monitoring the results and quantifying the benefits. I don't think we've been doing that until very recently. So you set out that it's not just a building has been saved, it's the jobs that have been created, the training that's been provided, new business startups, impact on visitor numbers. There's a litany of statistics that you could start to be handing to government departments to give the case for why heritage and conservation is important. Again, the second point is just pushing that idea of knowing what you have, the identity and diversity, that it's the heritage audit of what is there. There's common heritage, and there's also then the social heritage, that not everything's the heritage is assigned to a building. There's also intangible heritage, the thoughts of memories and that. I suppose Martin has raised it in his speech, the quality and contemporary design is thought about, so you're very clear that the insertions that you're putting in are qualitative and maybe are the heritage of the future. Okay, so investing in regeneration. They are saying that the public sector investment is necessary, that it's actually the catalyst, so we need to think about that. And the partnerships that we're not really, we've always really done it in Ireland, that we kind of decide the plan and we, not impose it, but we decide on it and it's handed to the public. You need to do this collaborative approach and have early and meaningful community engagement and have your stakeholders and your champions in the community for it to succeed. Now this isn't in the EU planner model, but I thought I had to talk about it. It's the Holland Model. It comes from Sweden. I'm a member of ICMAS Ireland, and ICMAS Ireland actually had Christer Gustafsson talk last year at their annual lecture on this model, and it kind of inspired an awful lot of us who heard about it. It was developed in Sweden during the recession. You had virtually stop in housing development, and you had a lack of conservation skills in the construction industry, and you had no money being invested into heritage. It was all being cut. So kind of very similar to where we are at the moment. So because there was no money going towards the sector, I suppose Christer looked to see where money was being directed, where were the funds, and he saw there was a labour market initiative. So he got the National Heritage Board to set up a training programme, and he trained unemployed construction workers in traditional building techniques and practiced this on historic buildings, but under the supervision of skilled craftsmen and conservation officers. And the outcome of this is that 100 historic buildings were conserved, most of them buildings at risk. A third of that region's building construction workforce were trained in traditional techniques. So he kind of believed at the start that he only had really 10 people he trusted to work on buildings. He had 1,000 out of 3,000 trained that he felt were that they could go out if they had somebody to supervise them. And 235 new jobs were created. And for the construction industry, it wasn't taking activity from another part of the construction industry. It was actually creating activity in that area. And that model has been adapted. So in this scenario, it was in a regional rural area. They've adapted it in Poland, where it was used in an urban industrial area to revitalise an industrial complex. And he's also been talking to China, and they've been looking and listening to how it may be adapted there. And he's happy to come back to Ireland if we want more talk about it. So I'm going to very quickly run through the next couple of slides. As I mentioned already, I really believe that we need to start thinking about heritage or construction, architectural conservation and heritage as the existing building stock that we have, and pushing that agenda as well, and that it needs to be training of the professions, and it needs to be a balanced training of what is new construction codes and methods, as well as what is the historic and appropriate materials and interventions into the historic environment, and that the early approaches need to be taken. I mean, an awful lot of the issues here and the controversies that have arisen is that the architectural conservation element comes at the end. And especially when we're dealing with access and fire, and I think that we need to kind of deal with that all at the start. So the few tools that we have here in Ireland that we already have existing that could help with this at the conservation areas, we could utilise these. So we could develop maybe the concept of enhancement and improvement schemes. Martin's already talked about the Historic Towns initiatives, which the pilot towns are Listowel, Youghal and Westport. There's the government policy and architecture. One of the actions in that is to create historic building committees in state organisations and local authorities. So I really think that would help an awful lot to give direction, and kind of I have been kind of talking to Martin about giving guidance how to set those up. And there have been certain benefits from the financial side that the draft development contribution schemes actually identifies protected structures as a category where there should be some exemptions. So maybe that will help encourage it. I will kind of say that the Local Authority Conservation Officer Network is also a benefit and should be utilised. Just the last point I maybe want to throw out is if we are going to privatise the lottery, I really think that we would benefit from a heritage lottery fund here. I think that should be essential, and you see the benefits in the UK. And just to show, this is conservation repairs and improvements from around the country, that heritage-led regeneration doesn't have to be grand, doesn't have to be big buildings, new builds, glossy glass and metal, that actually just doing up the building that exists there changes how that streetscape is and improves it and makes it better to look at. So I'll leave that there. And that's the scheme of all the benefits that are out there, of the information that's being done, but we're trying to actually push how much money that there is there to be generated out of conservation and heritage. But if we're not actually investing anything into that, those multipliers aren't going to work.